In this video, we're just going to really quickly go through some hints and tips for Islam practices 4 markers. So this question will ask for 2 contrasting ways an Islamic practice is carried out. Some examples of this type of question are listed here on the screen. So explain 2 contrasting Muslim beliefs about jihad, explain 2 contrasting Muslim beliefs about almsgiving, explain 2 contrasting ways that Muslims celebrate Ashura, explain 2 contrasting ways that Muslims celebrate Eid al-Adha, and explain 2 contrasting activities that Muslims carry out during Hajj. So the first thing to do when tackling this style of question is to think really carefully about what the practice in the question refers to. In this case, obviously it's a question about one of the celebrations that are in the specification, so you've got to be really careful that you don't get confused and write about something different. The next thing that you need to do is then think carefully about what contrast there could be and how the practice in the question is carried out. And that might be different depending on the question. So in this case, we're talking about a celebration. So maybe there could be a contrast that you can identify between individual celebrations versus celebrations taking part as part of a group. Or there could be a contrast between a focus on spiritual reflection and maybe the story behind the celebration versus just the focus on the celebration itself. So when we're structuring our 4-marker, remember that we need to use this structure here. So the question is asking for 2 contrasting ways that Muslims celebrate Eid al-Adha, and essentially there are 2 marks on offer for each of the ways that you explain. So the first way, explain one way. Here I've written, one way that Muslims celebrate Eid al-Adha is by individually reflecting on the story of Ibrahim being tested by God. Then to earn another mark for this way, I've developed my explanation by saying, they may do this by considering whether they bow their will to God in the way that Ibrahim did. Then moving on to my second way, a contrasting way, I've written a second contrasting way that Muslims celebrate Eid al-Adha is by arranging for an animal sacrifice to be made on their behalf. And then to develop this point further, we have the meat from this animal is then shared with family and friends, with 1/3 also being given to the poor. So when we write this answer in full, this is what it looks like. So what I want you to note here is that in both little sections, I've used the wording of the question. So the first section states, one way that Muslims celebrate Eid al-Adha is by. And then the second section states a second contrasting way that Muslims celebrate Eid al-Adha is by. So it uses the same structure, it's directly referencing the question. Notice also that it's been clearly signposted to the examiner in the second section that I'm aiming to give a contrasting view, because I've said a second contrasting way. So again, using the words from the question. Let's look at another example now and explain 2 contrasting Muslims' beliefs about jihad. Now in this case, this is an interesting example of a question where there is a clear contrast in the specification between beliefs about jihad, because you have to know about lesser and greater jihad. Remember that greater jihad is the personal struggle of every Muslim to live by the teachings of their faith, whereas lesser jihad refers to the military struggle to defend Islam, and it's carried out according to strict and clear rules. So those are our AQA definitions of both of those terms. So how would we put this in a question? Well, again, we're going to follow the same structure. So explain one way, develop it, explain a second way, and develop it. So we've got one Muslim belief about jihad is called greater jihad, the personal struggle to live by the teachings of Islam. And then to develop that point, greater jihad includes following the 5 pillars and avoiding what is haram. And then moving on to the second way, again, note the phrase contrasting belief, which is in there. So a second contrasting belief about jihad is called lesser jihad, the struggle to defend Islam from attack. And then to develop that point, again, there are clear rules set out for lesser jihad in the Quran, such as only using violence in self-defense. So again, here you can see how this answer looks. So point, development, point, development. Note again that the wording from the question is included. So Muslim beliefs about jihad is in both sections. It kind of uses that phrase. And also note that it's been, again, clearly signposted to the examiner that this answer includes a contrasting belief, which is what is asked for in the question.